You are listening to the Talking Right podcast with John Mosman, a voice for conservatism in a wasteland of progressivism.
Hello everyone, this is John Mosman, and this is the Talking Right podcast, coming to you live here on Saturday. You know, I was planning on not doing anything for a week, and then I started hearing a lot going on over the whole issue with, if I'm pronouncing his name right, Josh Duggar. He is the former executive director of Family Research Council's Actions. He was a part of that organization for a while, helping to establish Grassroots. And of course, he was a reality TV star. I believe the show he was on was 19 Kids and Counting, which had been on TLC. And there had been some controversy with him this year, especially with a molestation case. And we don't know exactly all the details to that, but that there was some idea that they might have been related to Duggar. And then also now the recent fallout from the Ashley Madison breach, which I had never even heard of this website called Ashley Madison. But apparently it's a website that's aimed at helping married men cheat. And apparently there was a huge data breach hack that had happened, and that included a lot of information. People who were top, even in the Republican Party, top tier. And there were notable people, and one of the most notable ones there was Josh Duggar. And they were able to confirm that it was his credit card that was connected to the address where he had previously lived or was living at. And so, you know, now all I've been hearing lately is a lot of hoopla on the issue of him. And of course, now a lot of secularists, a lot of atheists, a lot of liberals are coming out saying, you know, this guy, you know, he's a hypocrite, which he is. No doubt, that how can a man who preaches about family and preaches about the sanctity of marriage, that he would do such a thing. And I want to talk about a little bit of that, because I think that's something that my atheist friends out there don't understand, some of my atheist friends. Because it's so not understanding of why someone could be one thing and do another. If you're a Christian, you perfectly understand that a person who has a desire to know truth, a person who has a faith with Christ, struggles. I don't want to presume to judge people's struggles, because they are, after all, their struggles. But you do have to acknowledge, to some degree, why a lot of people are coming out and are really, you know, getting incensed about this whole idea about Josh and about him being a part, used to be part of this organization that has come down against gay marriage. And they'd say, well, there you go, he's a hypocrite. How's this guy? How can he speak for family values? And sadly, I hope this message gets to Josh, that he realized that his actions were wrong, that he did wrong, that he is a sinner, and that he needs to be forgiven of his sin, and Jesus will forgive him of his sin. But Josh is an example of why we have to be careful about morality, because while I'm often one to say that Protestant Christians out there put too much upon morality, so do atheists. Almost everybody puts morality into the main compass of what Christianity is and what it's about, and to make everything an issue about morality. And I don't think that's warranted, because it's not necessarily an issue of morality as it is an issue of sin, and an issue with the fact that you are born with a condition that causes you to do things not good. It's a sickness. And Josh Duggar's sickness, it's still a sickness. He is still afflicted with sin. But he made some choices. And I hope he realizes that his choices have impacted his ministry, that they have impacted his credibility as someone who will speak on the issue. And I've been saying this for a long time, that before you start talking about the issue of, say, gay marriage, that we as Christians get on board about what our consensus is on what traditional marriage is. Because if we're going to advocate the family, which we should, if we're going to advocate the sanctity and the holiness of traditional marriage, which is not just an element of having two complete different sexes, but the understanding that marriage is a means in which God uses to teach us values and to help us in our faith. That it is an institution that has to be respected. And for Josh, he obviously didn't respect that institution. Not enough to say, you know what, this is not what I want to be involved. I'm not here to judge Josh, but I am here to discern his statements and his actions. And this is something that has to be done. Because a lot of my atheist friends, a lot of my liberal friends are going to say, look, you hear, you see, this is why no one on the right, no Republican, no conservative, no Christian should ever talk about gay marriage. Because you guys are a bunch of hypocrites. Well, that's a grand sweeping statement that they probably will make, and that will show their ignorance on the situation. Okay? But the reality here is that what is going on is people who are of faith, people who believe in something that they believe is true, do struggle with their own demons. And I'm sure that if we were opening up some of those skeletons, those closets, and we would be able to see the skeletons of many of these atheists and liberals who have come out against Josh, we would see that some of the values and some of the ideas that you so rightly hold on to, that you have contradicted it. You see, the reality is we're all hypocrites to some degree. There is not one person that can completely 100% be absolved of being a hypocrite. And that's because it's a struggle between doing something like following your faith, following God, walking that line, doing as what Christ does, and the struggle between doing what as we are asked, doing what we are told, doing what we want to do. And this is a very real struggle for Christians. It's a real struggle for everybody. But it's a greater struggle for Christians because we are trying to uphold a value. And people like Josh, while they don't help the situation, people like Josh don't help, especially when they get so politically organized and becomes so politically involved and become huge in, supporting some of those values. That doesn't necessarily discount their values. It doesn't discount what they're saying is not true. But one of the assumptions here, and this is partly a problem of actually modern American Christianity and evangelicalism, has been this idea of making sin a moral issue, of making sin a issue where it's a moral flaw more than it is an inflicted disorder or disease that causes you to do things that are so selfish, to do things that are so awful. I believe that while he did wrong, I hope he realizes he did wrong. He did no favors for himself, his family, anyone he was previously affiliated with. And he's got problems and he needs to get help. And if he has broke the law, which he might, or anything else that comes as a result of those consequences, he should face. His wife's going to divorce him. That is a justifiable thing, and he needs to live with that. Actually, I'm thinking of Jared Fogle there. Sorry, my brain just crossed. That's kind of the day I've been having. I just realized it as I said that mid-sentence. But, if his wife divorces him, or if he loses friends, or if he loses a lot of things. You see, this is the thing about sin, is that there's consequences to sin. There's consequences. And so it's not just an issue of morality. It's a cause of sin. It's a situation of cause and effect. It's a situation of sin. And while it does impact him, and it will impact his life, and he may have to do A, B, C, or D because of it, that doesn't negate what he is saying is true. When he says that advocating something like, being traditional marriage, be pro-traditional marriage, right? Being against abortion. He doesn't negate those things. The issue of gay marriage, that doesn't negate the many different reasons why, as Christians, we are validated in knowing that gay marriage is not the correct way to be married. It's not the way to understanding of how God wanted marriage to be. And while he does impact himself and his character in any other kind of future endeavors he wants to, it doesn't negate that fact of what he's saying. And that's something that I hope some of my progressive, secular, atheist friends would know out there, is that it doesn't. Just like when atheists bring out great points. Does it negate what you're saying if you're an a-hole, or if you're a jerk? Atheists can say things that are right, and they can say them in such a way that make them jerks. But that doesn't necessarily take away from their point. Maybe maybe they're not scoring points with the way that they're communicating with people, but they're still making points. And if we're going to talk about this idea of, here's somebody who's a part of an idea or a part of a religion or part of a community where he's advocating one thing and he's openly, because he did, and I'm not going to say that he didn't, obviously he did. The fact that he even put his information on that website and indicates that even I can't judge whether or not he did or not actually cheat on his wife. I think he's come out and said he has, so I'm going to just assume. But even if he had just put his information on that website, he still would have done wrong, because there's no reason for him to do that. He was wrong in doing it, as well as other things that he's done. But the reality of the situation is, he and Christians are not the only ones who contradict their values. And I think what we are seeing more than ever is selective outrage. And you know what, atheists, I'm seeing it with you. I'm seeing it with the atheists who are out there with the whole Charlie Hebdo thing, supporting that and condemning the people who did that. And then as soon as a conservative religious woman does a contest in Texas, you come down on her. That's being a hypocrite right there. Let's not talk about what people have done in the name of atheism in a political standpoint, as we have seen in communist countries. So let's not get into this pissing contest where we start coming down on the situation. What has to be said here is this: that unfortunately, Josh, he did wrong. He made a mistake. He sinned against his family. He sinned against his wife. He sinned against God. He also did no good for his family or for the organizations that he used to work for. And he has to deal with that. That not only did he do something that was morally wrong, yes, but he did sin. And it's important that we understand the difference between morality and sin. We have to understand that people can make immoral decisions and make immoral choices, but still have good reasons for them, or still have good ideas, or still are still correct about other things. You can be a terrible dad or a terrible parent in the sense that you don't do everything you should as a parent. Maybe you've neglected them more than you should, right? Maybe you haven't provided as much as you should. Maybe you put your desires and what you want to do above what you should do for your kids, okay? There's bad parents out there. If a bad parent goes out there and says, you know what, it's wrong for someone to hit their child, or if there's someone that goes out there and says in such a way that's like so vagrantly, it's either so extremely violent or it's so unjustified. Or if a bad parent goes out there and says, you know, any parent that goes out there and molests their child or another child is wrong. Now, does it negate what they're saying or doing? No. It doesn't. Does it make them the best symbol for righteousness? No. And see, with atheism, there has to be a perfection here. I mean, that's ultimately probably one of the things that would be ultimately depressing about being an atheist, is you have to have this perfected knowledge. You have to have this perceived perfect education. You have to be completely educated. You have to be right. You can't ever be right about something and wrong at something at the same time. Because to them, they're so busy making arguments about using that as a way to discredit religion that they can't allow themselves to understand that human beings are flawed. That human beings are the problem. Regardless if a human being is doing something in the name of his religion, in the name of a government, in the name of an organization, in the name of anything. That human beings are flawed. And that bad people do good things and can say right things and be true about things. You know, a good example is Donald Trump. I'm not the biggest Donald Trump fan out there. I think a lot of his personality and I think a lot of the things that he has said are wrong. And he needs to apologize for them. But you want to know something? It doesn't negate the fact when he's right. And it doesn't negate the fact when he makes something statement. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, John, you're completely misconstrued in this. You're completely off the rope here. Because the issue here is that Josh Duggar did something where he said something about marriage, defending quote-unquote traditional marriage, and then committed the same crime. I get that. That's not lost on me. It's perfectly understandable that that happened. I understand that happened. I agree. Was it wrong? Yeah, it was wrong. He was completely wrong. Did he do something that was hypocritical? Yes. But being hypocritical does not mean you're immune to ever making a good point, and it doesn't mean that you're not immune from still upholding a great value or something that is true. Because, see, for people who are atheists, people who are in that mind frame, you have to be perfect. All of your logic has to be perfect. All of your argumentation has to be perfect. And if there's any flawed argument, if there's any flawed logic, then you cannot be the person who can be counted on to be a spokesperson for truth. But that's just flat wrong. And a Christian can still be a Christian, and a Christian can still uphold Christian truths, even though they have their own sin and conflict with those problems. And it doesn't negate their faith. It doesn't negate what they're saying. If anything, for Christians, one of the great joys is to know that even when we are wrong, even when we act hypocritical, even when we do something morally repugnant, like what Josh did, and even while we're pretending to be something we're not, or we're saying that we're defending something and then we ultimately go out and commit that crime, that our truth in the wisdom that we know and the faith that we rely on does not have to be dependent on us alone. It's dependent upon knowing what Jesus said, what the Lord has said, what His apostles have said, and relying on that tradition, and relying on that history, and relying on the truth that we have found in that. That it doesn't depend on one person. Because if Josh was an atheist, it would completely kill atheism. It would completely destroy it. Because with atheism, it's depending upon a person being 100% in truth in order to have truth. And to be morally justifiable, being morally justifiable 100%. And this is why they wrongly accuse religion of being the problems of the world, when it's not. It's people in religion. This is why they use to say that religion does not work. You see, if you notice that with a lot of atheists, they use a lot of examples of the people who are the dingbats, the people who are on the edges, who are saying the stupid things. They rely on these examples of these individuals rather than going to the overall picture. And the only reason why I'm doing this isn't because I'm trying to pick a fight or anything. I just have seen some of my atheist friends in social media really harp down on Josh, and not that he doesn't deserve that. In fact, that's the whole point, isn't it? He does deserve hell. He does deserve judgment. But because of Christ, he does receive forgiveness. Does that mean he should still be doing what he does? No. No. But there is forgiveness for Josh Duggar. As much as I can't stand what he's done, as much as I think he has done wrong, I think that's important. That's an important factor to keep in mind when talking about the issue. And I think Christians, evangelical Christians, need to realize that we have to be careful when we're playing this game of morality and sin. Because for a lot of evangelicals in America, the idea is if we can avoid morality, if we can avoid making immoral decisions, right? That what makes us sinful is that we do immoral things. If you think that is the concept of how sin works, you're completely wrong. You're completely wrong. And if you think you can avoid it, you're making the same conceptual mistake the atheists are. You're relying on yourselves. That shouldn't be considered there. And we need to, as Christians, realize that we have to be careful. Not that we need to give in to all the unruly demands of some of our critics, because they are at times unruly, and their criticisms are unfair at times, and that their overall gestures can be very, very ignorant. However, there is a concept here that we can learn from Josh Duggar, or Duggar, or however the hell we pronounce his name. And that is, when we go out to confess these things, we have to be careful. And Christians, we have for way too long been way too judgmental in the way that we do it. And we have to realize, too, that there's a difference between judgment and discernment. That there's a difference between being and doing. We have to understand that if we're going to open ourselves out there to make those kinds of remarks and to say some of the things that I'm sure Josh has said out in the open, in the public, in the media, then we need to realize even more that we have to follow that faith. And we have to realize that not only is going to a site that helps you cheat on your wife morally and sinfully wrong, but when you are trying to speak for something like family values, it doesn't help. And it seems to be that a lot of conservative, quote-unquote conservatives, and Republicans have been struggling with this lately. And I get it, we do struggle. There's a lot of Christian men out there right now who are struggling with porn. I used to struggle with porn. And it's hard to say we want to, because it's very hard. Especially because the rest of the world just wants to permit anything, right? The people who are telling us gay marriage is right are probably the same people who think having sex with a tree is okay. It's the same kind of rationale. All is accepted except for people who come out and say that's not accepted. That's the new rule of thumb here, right? G.K. Chesterton talks about this in his piece that he wrote, which is this little fictional story he wrote called The Conversion of the Anarchist, right? When he goes to the Liberty Club, where all things are permitted except for anybody who tells you that you have to do specific things or that some things are not permitted. Then there's no tolerance at all for it. And if you're going to go out there in the culture, and you're going to go out there in the public, and you're going to fight this war, you're going to be some kind of ministry, or you're going to be some kind of apologetic person, you need to go out there and be careful of the actions you make, because they do impact. And while I'm going to say that a lot of the atheists and secularists out there who are attacking Josh would not, they're not going to be swayed by anything that Josh would say anyways. They're already naturally hostile towards Christians, and they're naturally hostile towards Christian thinking. But you don't do any favors. You don't itch any room. And it's almost to a point here, Christians, where we have to understand and say, what's the point? Not that we're not supposed to go out and preach. See, but this is the whole point, right? Isn't this the whole point of what we're trying to figure out, what the Great Commission is? There's an idea that what the Great Commission is, what Jesus says when he says to go out, it doesn't mean to go out to every door. It doesn't mean to go and just bug everybody you see. And it doesn't necessarily mean to do some of the things that people have done. You need to have an answer for the hope that lies in you. We know that from the Bible. But at some point we have to pick our battles. And you have to ask yourself, what would be the point? I don't know what would be the point. What's the point? That's what should be considered here. That's what should be understood here. Because if we don't, if we can't understand what that means, we're going to struggle. And we have to come to terms, we have to come to grips with what it means. By the way, if you would like to know more information about me, if you'd like to know more information about this podcast, you can go to johnmosman.net. That's my site. There I've got blog articles, I've got links to my movie reviews, I've got links to my podcast and to my other YouTube videos. And if you're listening to this on Spreaker, awesome. If you're listening to it on YouTube, awesome. Although if you come to Spreaker and listen to it, and there's a link to Spreaker on my website, then you'll get some of the more information. They kind of have some of these good goodies with the intros and stuff like that you can't hear on YouTube. But I still wanted to put it on YouTube for the people who follow me on YouTube. But I will leave you guys with this thought, because I think it should be considered. What do we do? How do we answer the critics? How do we deal with those things? I think that's really important, don't you guys? You can tweet me at JOLEMO376. JOLEMO376. I gotta go, but it's been a pleasure, and we'll talk again. For Talking Right, I'm John Mosman. Good day.